Hello, class. Welcome back for today's lecture, Tuesday, April 21st. Yesterday, we talked about the start of the Cold War. We talked about how things went a little sour between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, more specifically between President Truman and Joseph Stalin. Today, we're going to pick up kind of carrying on when we talked yesterday about the Truman Doctrine and the U.S.'s promise or plan to fund those countries that may be susceptible to communist uprisings. Well, here we have the Marshall Plan, and the Marshall Plan was the Truman Doctrine put into action. The Marshall Plan was a donation, I guess you could call it, to countries in Europe that may have been susceptible to communism, but originally the goal is to rebuild some of the war-torn economies of Europe. Now they give $12 billion in total, which today is about $128 billion when you account for inflation. So a pretty considerable amount of money. And here in this map, those stacks of dollar signs, they are relative to the amount of money that country was given as a part of this plan. So the bigger the stacks, the more money they got. You could see that it differs country by country, and the point of that was it was balanced based on that country's impact in the world economy, and also it had a little bit of favoritism in which countries America was real protective of, specifically like if two countries were equal in their role in the world economy, if one of them was an Axis power in World War II and one of them was an Allied power in World War II, the Allied power was probably going to get a little more money. Just a little minor favoritism there. So you can see by this map here that Great Britain gets the most money. They got, I think, 26% of the total 12 billion, and that's because they're the most powerful economy in Europe. They are the most influential and kind of the overseer of European economics. That's why just a couple of years ago when Britain left the European Union, it freaks some people out, especially in Europe, as it should. That is going to have huge repercussions here in the next few years. But Great Britain gets a large sum of money. Also, they happen to be America's greatest ally, so we couldn't really justify giving the most money to someone else. That would have soured our relationship with them, which our relationship with Great Britain to this day is extremely important. Second highest paid country would be France. Again, no surprise, also very strong ally, and they were, without a doubt, the second most powerful economy in Europe. So that checks out. And then you have the Netherlands and West Germany, because now Germany's been split in half. Like they are two separate countries. They're two separate governments. So West Germany gets some money. Italy gets money. And you see Greece and Turkey both down there get money. This is on top of the assistance that was given to them originally in the Truman Doctrine. And you'll notice that most of this money is in Western Europe. Now, ignore those two countries I just said when I say Western Europe. Like Greece and Turkey are obviously on the east side, but they're not a part of the Eastern Bloc. and neither are Sweden and Norway up north. Eastern European countries were also offered money in this, but the Soviet Union blocked them. They didn't allow them to accept any kind of money or help because that doesn't fit communism. So countries like Poland and the Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia and those countries, they don't get the same treatment. They are blocked from it. So this is just to repair the economy so that way countries don't fall into an abyss and feel like they have to resort to communism. Because remember, communism only comes out of desperation. Communism only comes out of terrible economic times. So if we kept them afloat, if we helped keep them afloat, then hopefully they wouldn't feel any kind of threat of falling under communism. Now, obviously, the UK and France aren't going to fall to communism, at least not yet, not before these other dominoes do. But at the same time, helping their economy helps everyone's economy. So that's why they got helped. So that's the Marshall Plan. Now, the Berlin Airlift, one of my favorite stories, and you might remember it from last year because it's kind of a cute story, but I think this is one of the most influential moments in the Cold War, and I think it's terribly overshadowed. We'll get to some big name events like the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. That stuff that gets talked about quite a bit, as it should. But the Berlin blockade, which leads to the Berlin Airlift, was a huge moment and pretty tense. It was kind of the first really tense standoff between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. So, as we said yesterday, Germany split into quarters. Soviet Union gets northeast corner, and in the northeast corner is Berlin. Now, the Allies don't allow them to have all of Berlin. They get half of Berlin. So the Allies get West Berlin, but West Berlin is still surrounded by Soviet-occupied Germany. Well, to that point, there was a major highway that ran from West Germany into West Berlin. And there was, I think, 2 airports, or at least landing strips, that Allies were able to fly into when they needed. Now, nowhere in any kind of agreement was there in writing an agreement by the Soviets to always allow the Allies into Berlin. That was an oversight. By that I mean that was something that I guess the U.S. took for granted. They didn't think, well, we better get this promised in writing. They thought the Soviets would maintain goodwill and wouldn't, block that off ever. But they get angry with the Allies, specifically the U.S., because Germany's economy is kind of crashing, as you would expect from a country that's been decimated by war. And so the U.S. decided, it gets so bad that their money, I forget what they called their type of currency at the time, but it got so bad it became worthless and valueless. So people in Germany were using packs of cigarettes for currency, or they were just bartering, which is just trading things back and forth. So the U.S. decides, hey, we need to create a new currency for Germany. So they create what's known as the Deutschmark. And they believe that when circulated and when introduced to the rest of the world economy, it's going to balance the German economy. They offer it to East Germany. And of course, the Soviets say no. Reason one being, well, if anyone's going to help balance a German Eastern German economy, the communist East German economy, it's going to be the Soviet Union. B, or reason number two being, the Soviet Union they weren't really worried about the German economy. They kind of liked the fact that Germany was crashing because, first of all, Stalin is still mad at them. He's still, kind of has it out for him. And he likes the fact that they're desperate and suffering economically. So he blocks East Germany from it. Well, then that just means West Germany is going to be more powerful and more stable. So, or at least West Berlin is, and that's going to drive him crazy. So he decides to block that highway, the Autobahn, from any traffic from West Germany, meaning no one in West Germany can now get into any part of Berlin. And he can't block the air, he can't block any planes, not without violence. So he basically dares the Allies, if you want to bring supplies in to West Berlin, you're going to have to fly them in, which at the time, that technology, it was possible, but it hadn't been done before, so no one really knew what to expect. And it was, I think, just leaving winter in Germany, and the weather is cold, and they've used up so much of their coal and so much of their food, and they're running really low, and things are getting kind of desperate, and they're getting really worried. And they can't get anything from anywhere. The Soviets offer the West Berliners, hey, if you guys come over to East Berlin to pick up, and get joint citizenship, or just want to become an East German citizen, we'll give you free food. It's like the kind of weirdest, or not weirdest, but kind of creepiest ploy to get people to join your side is, hey, if you feel so desperate and come over to our side, we'll give you a snack. And of course, West Berliners had enough pride that they said no, and they wait. And the U.S. starts this Berlin airlift, planes flying in all day, every day. And there's some hiccups at first. There's some issues. First of all, the Soviets would conveniently plan their flight practice during specific times where Allied planes would fly over. And they'd do what they called buzzing the planes, where they'd fly way too close and make the pilots uncomfortable, possibly drop some of the cargo they're bringing in. But no shots are ever fired. First of all, Soviets don't want to engage the U.S. in war, at least not yet. They were working on their own atomic weapons, but they'd seen what America had done to Japan. I'm not saying they were necessarily scared of the U.S., but they didn't see a benefit right then in getting into all-out warfare. So all these goods are dropped into Berlin, and it turns into a massive success. 47,000 tons of goods daily were brought into West Berlin. Whether it's food, clothing, fuel resources, which is mostly coal, there's a ton of goods that are dropped in there. And if you remember last year, I talked about a pilot, a specific American pilot, on his day off. He was normally a part of the everyday Berlin airlift. On his day off, he still flies into West Berlin without goods, but he lands there, and he gets out and he meets a bunch of these little kids, and they're all enamored with him because he's a pilot, and they look dirty and hungry, and so he reaches in his pocket, and the only thing he has is 2 pieces of I think Juicy Fruit, Wrigley Juicy Fruit bubble or chewing gum, And so he gives it to him, and he was amazed at how they divvied up the gum amongst like 10, 15 kids, and nobody fought over it. They all just took off a little piece, and then if they ran out of gum, then they gave the wrappers to the kids to like smell and taste. And he was so impressed by it and so touched by it that he said, tomorrow when I fly over, I'll drop you guys some candy, or I'll drop you guys some treats. And they asked, how will we know it's you? And he said, I'll wiggle my wings. And so that next day he flies over and he drops, um, big boxes or containers of chocolate. And they look up at the plane that dropped it, and he does kind of a little, I don't know how pilots do it, but did a little shimmy in the air, shook his wings, and he became known as, I think they called him like Uncle Wiggly Wings or something real creative. But and that story spreads, and it's a sweet story, and um, it spreads back home to America. And then elementary schools did candy drives where kids would bring candy to school and they'd box it up and they'd send it over to the kids in Berlin. Stuff like that. It turns into a huge food drive. This was just a huge success for the U.S. And finally, the Soviets are like, all right, this blockade isn't working. So they lift the blockade, but the U.S. is like, we don't really care. We're delivering more supplies than we ever did before the blockade. So, I mean, sure, we'll use the one train that's able to come in, but we're still going to drop in supplies overhead. And that was a great move from the American perspective. Now, with this, the European countries still feel a little uneasy, and because something like the success of the Berlin airlift showed America was every bit as powerful, if not more powerful, than the Soviet Union. So these European countries felt, well, as long as America is on our side, then we'll be okay. So they create this alliance or treaty, whatever you want to call it, and it's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. A lot of people think that says North American. No, it's North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's an alliance between, originally I think it was 12 countries, and it was the U.S. and then most of Western Europe. And it was just promising defense for each other. If any of these Western European countries get attacked by the Soviet Union, then powerful countries like the U.S. would get involved and help. And these Western European countries believed that Soviet Union would, if they ever actually planned on taking over Europe, well, these countries' alliance, like handwritten and signed alliance with the U.S. would be enough to keep the Soviet Union away. Because the U.S. would be liable to launch nuclear war, which at the time we still didn't know a ton about. We knew it totally decimated Japan, but we didn't know about the long-term effects yet. So we were still liable to set one off. But NATO is still around today. I think it's got over 30 members now, most of Europe. And there's different divisions. There's members, and then there's like partners or friends of the alliance. It's kind of a messy thing, but it's a big deal today. Actually, today it plays more of a role militarily than it did during the Cold War. Like NATO was the one that led the initial charge on Afghanistan after the World Trade Centers was hit, after the 9/11 attacks. NATO was actually the first organization or military group to move into Afghanistan. And then they did the same in Libya and Iraq. They've played a big role. Now they're not massively like powerful. They're a slightly more powerful military force than like the United Nations, which is basically no military force. But they're still a very influential group. And there's a map of, well, that would be today's NATO. US, Canada, Iceland, the UK, Ireland. You see there's a few Eastern European countries that have now joined. Those would not have been a part of the original members. I probably should have put a map of the original members of NATO, but oh well, you get the point. So today's essential question: why did the European countries join NATO? I guess I should have asked, why did they create NATO? Because they're actually the ones that created it. They got the U.S. to join with them. But why do Western European countries want to create something like NATO? So that's a question added to the document from yesterday. And that should be it for today. Again, we'll have a Zoom meeting on Thursday at 2. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Go outside today. It's going to be beautiful. It's supposed to rain, like, I think Wednesday. Go outside. Go run. I don't know. I'm going golfing. I know that. So, have a good one, guys. Take care. Stay safe. Stay healthy.